Okay, so in front of you, you should be seeing the progress workbook. Now, this is a simple Excel sheet that I put together and send across to my clients at the start of each month. It's a really useful document to have in that it keeps everything organised and it keeps everything documented as to what you are doing and what you're planning to do going forwards. So I wanted to take you through each of the tabs and explain why I have included them. The most important tab, and the tab that always sits at the front for me, is the marketing plan. So this is just a really granular breakdown of each of the activities which I've already completed for a client or plan to complete for the client in the future. Just some bits of housekeeping when I do make a new one of these is I always make a point of including the client's logo up here, and if necessary I'll change the background colours as well, just to keep the overall document looking quite personalised for the client so that they can see it is for them. Each of the activities I break down and organise by the different category that they fall in. So in this example, which you'll have a link to in order to be able to look at in more detail, I have overall planning activities just to keep the account with the client right, nice and efficient. And also this client in question has both an SEO service and then secondly a PPC service as well. Now, with all of this, it just operates on a simple traffic light system broken down by activities in each of the given months. This is just a 3-month example, but you can easily extend this up to 12 before it becomes anything that looks a little bit disorganised. So with all of the activities, you need to make a plan of what it is you're actually going to be doing. Now, with all of that, although you will be doing whatever service you've sold, you need to make sure that you've also factored in the time to cover off the activities which just form the part of everyday account management. So you've got things like catch-up calls, and in the following months you've also got items like updating this report and sending this across. Now, although those activities might not form a huge amount of time what you're spending on the client, it's really important that you still include them because it can see the actual time and effort that goes into running the account, so the client can see that and actually understand the level of work you are doing. What I do is each month I will add this in and I will update it. And as the months go on, you'll see that as you get down to the bottom here, that the activities aren't yet filled in. So from your perspective, you have something to work off and you know exactly what you're going to be doing. And from the client's perspective, they also know what's going to be coming up in the future months. I tend to make it a dark colour rather than a red colour to say that it hasn't been completed, simply for the fact that it looks a bit neater and doesn't look as angry or as important if that item is labelled as a red. If something is halfway through and I need to finish it off in the previous month, I'll just make it a yellow or an orange colour, and then obviously green are activities which have been completed. So as I say, that keeps everything really nice and organised, and off the back of any other client communications that you get in or the end of month catch-up call that you organise with your client, you can adjust this as you go. I do make a point of saying to clients that they can freely adjust this if they want to. It also sets the expectation of you can only complete a certain amount of activity each month. So if there is anything that is really important, I always say to them, look, we can swap something out in place of another activity that you'd like me to focus on. But it means that, just say we're looking at 4 or 4 page fixes and the client wanted us to work on something else, then that would move into the following month. So overall, it keeps everything nice and organised. In the next tab, we have something which looks very similar but probably a bit smaller, and this is actually a tab specifically for the client activities themselves that they need to complete. There's so much information and documents and images and bits of advice that the client needs to send across in order for you to be able to do a good job. Now, off the back of that, I'll be honest, a lot of clients aren't the most organised of people. So it also helps to have a little separate tab in here so that you can keep a record on all the things that you need the client to do in order to be able to make sure that you're doing a good job for the business. Now, this operates in exactly the same way as the marketing plan, and it's just colour coded in order to understand which of the activities that you're still waiting on for the client to complete. Now, moving on to the next tab, because this gets sent across at the start of the month, I also make a point of including the results. Now, the results are essentially the most important metric that you decide upon as a measure of your efforts and how they are yielding success. Now, what those results actually are is going to be really dependent on who the client is and what it is they're after and what service you are selling. In this instance, because it is a SEO and PPC focused service, the core things that we are looking at in terms of generating business for them are phone call clicks and email requests, and then that's broken down by the individual channels which they have come through. So I make a point in here of including the total results rather than just the results from our individual service. So this gives them a really useful barometer to understand how their website is performing overall. And from here we can then split out, say, how many phone calls are generated by organic, which is the SEO service. And again, I add these figures in and the graph at the top automatically updates. It's really important to remember that certain clients are going to respond in different ways to how they interpret information. So some people might be quite happy to look through a table like this and to pick out the numbers, but others are just going to be more interested in seeing a graph and understanding the fluctuations of whether numbers go up or down. But it's also really important that you are focusing on results overall that matter to the client and the business as much as the service. As I say, what those results actually are is going to be a decision which you're going to have to make, but it's one which is going to be really valuable in helping the client to understand what it is you're actually doing. The next tab that I put in, and I make a point of including for every client, is just a total visits tab. So this is just an overall graph with a table underneath showing the data, which is the total number of sessions which are pulled out from Google Analytics. Now again, total visits aren't necessarily going to be an indicator of the overall level of input that you are going to be offering as part of your service. If we were only creating a PPC service, for example, that might only be contributing to, say, 10% of the overall traffic figures. But it's important to include this graph simply for the fact that, again, the client can see the overall performance of their website and what it is generating in terms of overall traffic numbers. The other really important point with this is for two reasons. Is that one, by mapping it out on a year start to a year end basis, so from January until December, you can start to pick out if there's any seasonal trends that have happened previously with traffic in the past. So if we take a look at this one, there does seem to be an upward trend of traffic increasing through from February until April, and then it tends to sort of dip back down for the rest of the year. Now, if you can go back further, so if we were to include another line on 2017, you might see that that's also the same. Now, it sets the expectation with the client that they should be expecting a better couple of months during this period, but also not to be surprised when traffic levels subsequently drop for the rest of the year. It can also help you identify any historic issues which have happened on the account previously, as to whether something that they have worked on has suddenly increased or decreased the traffic. Although I only started working with this client back in January of 2019, I have also made a point of including the historic traffic metrics previously as well, because again, although I'm not involved in these, it gives me a good understanding of how the website is performing for me. And again, you'd be surprised at the number of clients who don't actually have any real idea of how many visitors their websites are getting in the first place. So as a universal one, this is really important to include as an individual tab. Now, the next two tabs are specialised and focus purely on the individual services that I am offering the client. Now, depending on what it is you're going to be offering the client, these could be entirely different. But what I've tried to do across both of them, both the SEO and PPC, is to try and create a tab which includes all the information in quite a granular, detailed level, but is something that a client can look at quite easily to understand the overall performance of an individual channel. If we were to take a look at SEO, for example, the two things that I include are an individual graph, which shows the organic sessions, and a focus keyword table, which shows the individual rankings of the keywords which we were focusing on and how they perform over any given month. So with this client in question, there is not a great deal of different keywords out there. We're actually only focusing on 5, which is more unusual compared to other clients, but this is the right focus for them. Now, as you can see, what I've done is color coded this, and this has a formula running in the background, so that when I add a new month in here and expand it out to include July's figures, the numbers that I put in will just automatically color code. Now, again, you could take all the colors out of this, but it's a really helpful representation to see which keywords are the ones that are increasing, which ones have stayed the same, and which ones might potentially be decreasing at the same time. Although clients can be very hung up on the importance of individual keywords and where they're ranking for them, it's also important to make sure that you are including your overall traffic figures for a given channel. Even though in some instances some of the keywords haven't increased, we can also look at the overall traffic figures and how they compare to the year previously. There's lots of different ways that you can show the data to a client, but ultimately it's not advisable to just provide one data set, otherwise a client can get particularly hung up on the fact that Y keyword 1 in this instance isn't yet position 1, even though by looking at the organic sessions, you've still had a good, positive and healthy increase in your overall organic traffic levels. With all the data, it is really useful to provide some interpretation as to what this data is showing. So this is why I include a little notes table here. So first of all, that's just to highlight the fact of what these figures mean. Bear in mind, although the person you might be dealing with at the business is well versed in whatever service you're doing, these reports can often be sent on to senior management or other people in the business who might not be familiar with the language of digital marketing. So it makes sense to include in here exactly what the chart does and what it's explaining. I also make a point of trying to factor in just other little features which might not be easy enough to include within a table. So in April 2019, you might find that one of your keywords is a featured snippet, for example. You don't have to include these notes, but if there are any changes which almost you need to keep a record of, then it's a really useful thing to have them written down. So moving on to the PPC tab, you'll see that this looks pretty different. Now again, it's a case of deciding what the key items that you want to focus on as part of your service. Now in this instance, PPC itself is a very technical, data-driven exercise, and although I could include graphs for this, it would mean a lot of graphs that a client has to look through, and at this stage, trying to do that level of analysis within an individual top-level report seems a bit excessive. But although I could make a separate graph for impressions and another one for clicks and another one for click-through rate, that is not the most important at this stage. So at the moment, we just want a month-on-month comparison for how many impressions and clicks are being generated, and again the overall performance of that traffic going through by looking at the click-through rate, the cost per click and the bounce rate. Now with the way that a PPC campaign is structured, and particularly in this instance, they have multiple campaigns going on and multiple ad groups, so that I could keep filling and filling this chart with data. What you have to remember is that you're trying to find something which is effective for the client as much as it is for you. Now, although you could provide a really granular breakdown, is that something which a client is going to look through? And in most instances, I find they don't. Again, I include a little notes tab just at the bottom to understand the key activities for the month. So with all of this, what I end up doing is going through this document and then picking out different success stories, as it were, so that when it comes to actually wrapping this document up in an email, all you need to do is introduce it and explain some of the top level results. So for instance, if I was sending this across having filled everything in for June or July, I might say to them, okay, well, in terms of plans for this month, we are going to focus on competitor bidding, and we are going to make a number of improvements to your overall SEO, focusing on your metadata and your homepage. You don't need to list off every individual item, it just needs to be a neat summary within the email. Then within that, I also make a little bullet point list of the key results out of this. Bear in mind that some clients are going to be busy and they aren't going to necessarily look at this document. So by including some of the top level results in the email as well, ensures that they get eyes on the most important things. So if I was putting together an email on this, I might say the overall number of phone calls you've had in June was the same as it was in May, but we have experienced an increase in total email requests. You don't need to go into any more detail at that because the expanded level of detail is in the document itself. Then you just want to almost pick out a key bullet point from your total visits. So you can say total visits have increased from this month to this month and work out the percentage. And again, when it comes to the SEO, there might be different things that you want to pick out on. So you could say keyword 1 has increased from position 6 to 4. Equally from PPC, there's a lot of data you could show, but it even might just be a case of saying overall clicks versus spend has gone up, and we've also seen a drop in bounce rate. You just need to keep these as really short summaries when it comes to putting it into the email. So as I say, I sit down and I work through this both for this client and for every other client I have going. They're individual reports for each client, and work through these at the start of each month. So this does subsequently mean that the first 1 or 2 days of a working month are particularly busy because there is a lot of admin and a lot of data to pull from different sources in order to be able to merge this all together. But the reason for doing this, as I say, is the fact that there is a really solid document that the client can see, which shows first of all the results that you are getting for them, the results of how their website is performing as a whole, and just to keep everything organised for them to understand what it is you have both done and are going to be doing. If this isn't a document which you feel works for you, then fine. If you want to adapt it to however you'd like to, then again, please feel free to do so. There are loads of different ways that both agencies and freelancers report on digital marketing back to clients, but I find that having one consolidated Excel chart is most effective in terms of getting all the necessary information across. Now, this forms the start of the month. At the end of the month, you'll also be looking to have a client catch-up call. And in the next lesson, we'll be going through the specifics of how to get the most out of that.